cool. So just follow me, though, because I'm going to be moving around a little bit. Listen, we're starting a brand new series today. You can see what it's called right there in the back. It's called Not Alone. But here's the thing. I grew up homeschooled, as most all of you know by now. I grew up homeschooled, so I never had as many friends as most people my age did or do. I'm an introvert by nature, right? So I've always had some kind of natural loner tendencies. I don't mind being by myself. Sometimes I need to be by myself in order to not start grumping and growling at people. My interests from my hobbies, my interests in music and movies and whatever else, they've always been a little eclectic, a little weird, a little different from most of my peers. So I'm pretty accustomed to not always feeling like I fit in 100%, like I'm kind of used to being the odd person out in one way or another. But there's been some moments in my life where I distinctly remember feeling completely and utterly alone. Not just lonely, not just like I don't fit in here or anything, but completely and utterly alone. The first time is when I was 15 or 16 years old. And that whole year between like 15 and 16 was probably one of the worst years of my life. It was just a rough year for me for a whole ton of reasons, which we don't need to get into tonight. But I remember this one moment. A bunch of people from our church, I think it was from our church, I really don't remember, a bunch of people that my family knew were gathered at somebody's house. It was a big house. They had a pool. But I couldn't swim. I still can't swim. So while everybody else was having a great time, I kind of wandered off into the far corner of the yard at these people's house. And I remember pushing the swing set. Pushing a baby swing. And the swing, in my memory, and it could totally be not this because I'm old now and so my memory tricks me sometimes. But I remember it was hanging like from a tree. And it was off in the corner of the yard and I was pushing this swing. And I know that this is going to sound mad weird, okay? But I can't remember who was in the swing. I certainly hope there was actually a baby in that swing because, one, I used to love helping people with their kids. But two, how creepy would it have been if I was standing in the corner of somebody's yard pushing an empty swing like... Can you imagine, had a glazed look at me, pushing his swing? No. So I hope there was somebody in the swing, but I don't remember who it was, right? But I remember pushing the swing and thinking and all these different thoughts. But I remember feeling so alone and so unwanted, like this huge dark cloud was surrounding me in that moment, right? And in that moment, I felt totally unloved, unwanted, rejected. I felt like nobody cared about me or understood me at all. Looking back, I know that wasn't the case because lots of people loved me and wanted to be my friend, but I couldn't see it then. I thought nobody wanted anything to do with me, and I felt like I was all alone. And as weird as it sounds, I still remember how that loneliness felt too. The best way I know how to describe it is heavy, right? It just felt heavy, like the weight of my loneliness and isolation was trying to crush me. And then, thankfully, due to the prayer of my mom and my parents and some other people who cared about me and some counseling from some really wise people, I was able to make it out of the darkness of that particular situation. But it wasn't the last time that I would experience the weight of feeling alone. When I was 18 or 19 years old, I remember struggling with this very specific kind of sin and temptation that I desperately wanted to get away from, but it seemed like the harder I tried to stop doing it, the more often I would do. And I felt so alone under the weight of my guilt and shame that I was too scared to ask anybody for help and advice. I was terrified that if I told them what I was struggling with, that they would judge me, they would reject me, and they wouldn't want anything to do with me. And I've since learned that millions of people struggle with that same kind of sin, and that being honest about it allowed God to actually set me free from what I was struggling with. But when I was 19 or 20, I had some huge questions about God, about church, about religion, and even more than that, I remember wondering why, if God was love, why did so many people who claimed to love him and called themselves Christians, why were they so willing to hate people who were different from them? Or why, if God was good, was there so much bad things in the world? These questions and a lot more questions like them were heavy on my spirit, and they would keep me up at night sometimes. But I felt so alone because I was afraid that I felt alone because everyone else around me seemed like they had it all figured out, like they were absolutely certain. And I was too afraid to ask these big, heavy questions because I was afraid that the people around me would reject me or think I was a heathen or a heretic or something like that. But at some point during this time frame, I read a book that helped me understand that these kind of questions are actually pretty common. And asking and exploring these questions actually helped my faith grow, not shrink. When I was 23, I moved from Michigan to Fayetteville, North Carolina, and I did not know a single person in the entire state of North Carolina, let alone Fayetteville or Cumberland County. I knew absolutely nobody. Everybody that I knew and loved was 850 miles away. And I remember one night sitting in my apartment. It was one of the first 2 or 3 weeks that I moved here. And I was close to tears with the weight of loneliness that was once again had me feeling like I was just completely and totally alone. I was ready to quit the job that I hadn't even started yet and drive back to Michigan that night. And I remember praying and saying, God, I can't do this anymore. But like that week, God introduced me. I was able to meet some people. I believe that God brought them into my life. But these were people who, some of whom are still some of my very closest friends to this day. And pretty much every single person to whom I'm close, all my best friends and confidants I've met because I ended up staying here in North Carolina despite that loneliness. And then finally, when I was 31, my daughter was born with this incredibly rare genetic condition that has basically required my wife Tiana and I to change all of the dreams and plans that we had for her before she was born. She actually stopped breathing for a few seconds when she was 8 days old, and I still remember driving back from the hospital after I went home to get some things. Tiana and I were going to be staying in the hospital that night, and I went home to get some stuff. And I remember driving back to the hospital from my house and feeling so full of pain and grief, and I felt so alone in that moment because I was sure that nobody could possibly understand how much it hurt or how desperate I was to change things. I felt like God had abandoned me in that moment, like he didn't care how much pain I was in or what was happening. And again, that feeling was so heavy. I felt like I could hardly breathe for a few minutes. And I also remember, though, on that drive, this won't make so sense to most of you, but I even remember exactly where I was. I was coming off I-95, getting on the Highway 87 on-ramp, and this song came on Spotify, and some of the lyrics to this song, the song is about this guy who had similar feelings to where I was at. He was like, Jesus, where are you? Like, what is going on? Are you still with me? What's happening? And as I was getting on this on-ramp, the lyrics started, said, I'm right here beside you. I feel what you feel. I'm here to guide you when death is too real. And for the last 4 years of my daughter's life, despite all of the challenges and difficulties and uncertainty and everything else, when everything starts to feel overwhelming, those words from that song from that night have still been a source of peace and comfort for me. They remind me that God's with me no matter what. But in each of these moments, I just felt so almost crushingly alone. And there's been a whole bunch of other times throughout my life where I've felt alone for some reason or another, even as recently as last week. But these are 5 moments, probably the 5 biggest moments in my life that I can still vividly remember the weight of feeling totally alone and being reminded by God or somebody, sometimes right away, sometimes after a few weeks, but being reminded by God that I was actually not alone at all, that he was with me in each of those moments and in each of those points in my life. So at this point in the message, whether you're here in the room with us or watching online, or maybe you're watching later in the week, I'm sure you're like thinking to yourself, wow, guy, this is a super inspiring sermon. All you're talking about is all the pain and weight of feeling alone and how bummed out you were, and that's not cool, man. And that would be a fair point. But the reason that I'm sharing this information with you is I know that most, if not all of you in this room tonight have felt the exact same weight of feeling alone. When I told you that first time that I remember how that loneliness felt, and it felt heavy, for some of you something snapped and you're like, yeah, I know that feeling. I know that weight. I know what you're talking about, right? And you have been there where you feel absolutely, totally, and completely alone. Like nobody understands you. Like nobody cares about you. Or like if people knew the questions you were asking or the sins that you were struggling with, that they would judge you and reject you almost instantly. And every time you feel this way, you feel like you're the only one who ever has or ever will feel that way. which makes you feel even more alone. It's this perpetual cycle of loneliness and feeling like you're the only one who's dealing with it. And so I decided to open up our time together tonight by telling you that you are not alone, because I know that weight. I've felt that soul-crushing pressure of wondering if anything is what it seems like it is. And last year around this time, we did a series called I'm Not Okay. And in that series, we talked about how it's okay to not be okay, but it's not okay to stay that way. And how honesty plus hope plus help will bring us to healing from whatever it is that we're going through. But the thing is that the devil doesn't want us to be okay. He doesn't want us to be healed. And one of the best defenses he has is to convince us that we're the only ones who feel this way, or the only ones who deal with that. To convince us that we are alone. And the kind of loneliness that I'm talking about paralyzes us in the fear of judgment or rejection. And it keeps us from being honest about where we are and the help that we need. It keeps us from becoming okay. Just as another quick example, week, my dad called me and he asked me like 3 different times how I was doing, right? The first 2 times I lied to him. I would say I lied to his face, but we were on the phone, so I lied to his ear. And I said, nah, man, I'm good. I'm okay. I'm fine. And the second time he kind of mentioned it again. He's like, yeah, I'm good. And then the third time we were talking about something that was really weighing on me last week, and I was like, yeah, okay, I lied. I'm not okay. And then he started asking just a couple quick questions, but mostly just listening, and he let me kind of pour out what I was dealing with to him. And afterwards, I felt a lot better. I felt like a weight had been lifted off of me. Feeling alone is what happens when we believe the lie that we are more messed up than everybody else, so that no one else could possibly understand what we're going through. We feel like we're more broken than anybody else, or more hurt, or more sinful, or more socially awkward. We're afraid that we have more doubt or bigger questions than the people around us, so we never ask our questions or address our concerns. We think that if we're honest about the pain that we feel, or the grief that we're enduring, or the abuse that we've experienced, that people will either blame us somehow, or they still won't care about us or believe us, which seems like that would be even worse than just holding in all of our secrets. So we just try to bury it all deep down inside and keep it to ourselves. But the longer that we do, the more alone we'll feel. And so tonight, as you can see behind me, is the beginning of a new series called Not Alone. And the whole point of this series is in the title. It's to remind us that no matter what you're going through right now, if it's pain or grief or loss or feelings of abandonment or fear or anxiety or worry or failure or doubt, you're not alone in feeling that way. You're not alone in dealing with abuse or in asking big questions or struggling with sin or having trouble in school or dealing with depression or just wishing in general that life was different than the way that it is. You are not alone. Most likely, no matter what you're going through tonight, there's somebody here in this room who either has or is experiencing something very similar, who would completely understand what you're feeling if you are willing to be totally honest with where you are and what you're dealing with. And even if none of the people in this room tonight, from students to leaders to anybody else, if nobody in this room has walked through what you're walking through, there is still somebody here tonight who can understand what you're feeling, because Hebrews 5:14 through 16. Turn there if you have a Bible or a Bible app, because we're going to hang out there the rest of the night. Hebrews 5:14 through 16 says, "So then, since we have such a great high priest who has entered heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to what we believe. This high priest of ours understands our weaknesses, for he faced all of the same testings we do, yet he did not sin. So let us come boldly to the throne of grace." So let us come boldly to the throne of our gracious God. There we will receive his mercy, and we will find grace to help us when we need it most. So we're going to break this message down a little more in depth in just a minute, but essentially what this passage of Scripture, these 3 verses, is saying is that you are not alone. Whatever you're feeling, Jesus feels it right along with you. Whatever you're going through, he's been through too. questions, temptation, slander, abuse, betrayal, rejection. Jesus has been through all of that and so much more. The Greek word that is translated understands in the New Living Translation. We have a high priest who understands our weaknesses. In your translation, it may say we have a high priest who sympathizes with our weaknesses. The Greek word that's translated there, it literally means to suffer along with. So we have a high priest who suffers along with our own problems and difficulties and weaknesses. And it can be tempting to think of God as this apathetic being who observes our pain and suffering, but doesn't really care all that much. But this perception could not be further from the truth. Not only does Jesus care about our pain, he feels our pain with us. Jesus isn't a high priest who hears your pain and feels sorry for you. He understands what you're going through on the deepest level possible because he feels it with you. You are not alone. And the writer of Hebrews tells us that since we are not alone, since Jesus understands everything we're going through, we have the opportunity to come boldly to the throne of our gracious God, and there we will receive his mercy, and we will find grace to help us with when we need it most. What this means is that we have direct access to the creator of the universe, and if we are willing to come boldly to him, he will help us when we need it most. In researching for this message, I found a bunch of different examples of what it means to come boldly to the throne of grace, but the one that resonated with me the most was to come to God without reservation, completely honest about where we are and what we need. When we feel alone, we tend to hold things close and not reveal our secrets, but when we realize that we are not alone, we can boldly and honestly say where we are and what we're going through and ask for help when we need it most. Realizing that we're not alone, that Jesus will always not only be with us, but understand us on a deep and intimate level is incredibly powerful, but it doesn't mean that we will never feel alone again. The weight of loneliness is a huge obstacle when it comes to being okay, because it keeps us from being honest. It keeps us stuck in our sin. It makes it hard for us to ask for help, and it makes hope sometimes feel out of reach because the weight and the pressure just feels too heavy. And that's why we have to come boldly to God's throne. There will always be an element of fear when it comes to opening up about what we're going through, to be honest about where we're at. Whether it's to God or somebody else, there's always going to be that element of fear. What if they reject me? Or what if they don't believe me? Or what if? We're always going to be scared of being judged or rejected or betrayed. So we have to boldly put our hope in God, to be honest about our struggles and ask him to help us get back to being okay. The whole thing is a process. Another example of boldly approaching God's throne that I found in my research today is to approach him consistently. So not just without reservation, but consistently. We can't just come one time to God and say, hey, God, here's what I'm dealing with. Hope you have fun with that. We have to continue to ask him every day to help us get through whatever it is that we're going through. Not just once and hope everything's all better, but as often as we need him, as often as we're hurting, and as often as we feel alone. When we approach God with honesty and ask for help consistently, we will begin to see healing, even if it's just a little bit at a time. So, as I get ready to close this portion of the service, we're going to go to small groups in just a minute. If you're here and you don't feel alone and you feel okay, that's awesome. You know, I hope that there are people like that in the room tonight who are like, nah, man, I feel good. I know that God's with me. My life, other than some overall weird pandemic stuff or this or that, the other thing, I'm pretty much good. Listen, that's amazing. And I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful for this season in your life. But can I remind you that even if you don't feel alone, and even if you feel like you're okay, that you are still not alone? And what I mean by that is that you are surrounded by people, whether it's here or at home or at school or online school or wherever you're at or at work or wherever you go. You're surrounded by people who do feel alone and who are not okay. And you have the opportunity to light up the darkness they're living in by shining God's love into their lives. And that doesn't mean telling them what to do. It doesn't mean trying to fix things for them. It doesn't mean offering all kinds of unsolicited advice. It just means making sure they know that they are not alone, that you have been where they are, and that you're available if they need you. In fact, that's the role that the leaders and myself want to play for all of you for the rest of this series. Here's the thing. We are here for you. If you're alone and you need somebody to talk to you, we are here for you. If you've been wrestling with some big questions, we want you to ask them. If you've been keeping your pain a secret because you're afraid of what people will think, I want you to tell us. Tell me. There's literally nothing you could say to me, and I mean this. Okay, that's a lie. There's like one thing. If you came up to me and said, dude, before I came here, I ate a live baby, that would probably change the way I think about you a little bit, okay? Because that's just no. But there's literally nothing else that you could say to me that would change the way that I think about you, okay? Or that would change how much I care about you or love you. There's nothing. So whether you're struggling with a certain sin or you got some big questions about yourself or about faith or about anything else, there's nothing you could say. There's no question you could ask. There's no word you could utter that's going to change the way that I feel about you. I need you to understand that, okay? And that's 10 times more true for God. There's nothing you could bring to his throne that's going to tell him, oh, get away from here with that. We're here to remind each of you that you are not alone. And so that's why for the rest of this series, it might be 2 weeks, it might be 4 more weeks. I don't know exactly how long this series is because ultimately it's going to be up to you guys. You are going to help us decide the content for the rest of this series. When we go to small groups, each of you are going to get a card. My notes say a card that looks like this, but of course I forgot to bring one up here with me. But it's like a little 3x5 card. You'll see it when you get to small groups. When you get to small groups, each of you are going to get a card. All right? And that's your opportunity to be honest with us. You can write your name or you can not write your name. It's totally optional. You can stay totally anonymous if you want to. But I want to challenge you tonight to remember that you're not alone, right? So if you want to share something that you're going through, or if you have some big questions that you want to ask, or if you just want to get the fact that, hey, I'm struggling with this particular sin or this particular problem or this particular issue or whatever it is that you're going through, if you want to just get that off your chest, this is your opportunity to do so tonight. We will only contact you. I will only contact you if you ask me to. Like there's a bottom line on the card that says, I want you to contact me about this. If you check that, then yeah, I'll reach out to you. Otherwise, nah. I'm never going to approach you about it unless you check that card. This whole process is totally up to you, right? And when you ask or talk or mention things that maybe we do end up talking about in one of the next couple of weeks of this series, nobody's going to know that it was you. I'm not going to say, well, on Luke's card, he wrote blah, 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 so that's not how that's going to go, all right? I may not even acknowledge whether the topic came from a student or not. It may come from my brain. It may come from yours. It may come from both of ours. I don't know. But I want you to help us with this because I want to know what is it that makes you feel alone so that we can address these topics. Okay, how can we help you? This process is completely confidential and safe, and it's a way for you to start the process of healing and being okay. And tonight, maybe you feel okay, but you're like, man, I've got some big questions, and I haven't been asking them because I don't know if anybody else is asking these questions, and I don't want to be the only one who's asking these questions because then people are going to look at me funny. What's wrong with you? Why you like? Even if it's that, even if you're totally okay, but you have some questions that you've just been too nervous or scared or uncertain to ask, whatever it is, I'm not trying to put what this means to you in any kind of box. It's just I want you to understand that you have this opportunity to, you have this opportunity to get whatever it is you need to ask or say off your chest and onto a card and ultimately into a box, which only my eyes will see. All right, we're going to pray really fast, and then we're going to go into our groups. Hey, God, I just want to thank you for every single student here. I thank you, God, that we are not alone, that you are with us always, and that no matter what we go through or where we find ourselves, God, that you have been there. You understand, and you're feeling it right along with us. You're suffering alongside of us. You're feeling whatever it is that we feel, and you want so very much to comfort us. Your word says in Matthew 5:4 that blessed are those who mourn, that God blesses us when we mourn, for we will be comforted. And so as we're in whatever kind of difficult situation we're in, or maybe it's not that difficult of a situation, we just got some big questions we're looking for answers to, or anywhere in between, God, you're with us. You're right there alongside us. No matter how lonely we might feel at times, no matter how heavy it might be weighing on us, we are not alone. And I thank you for that. In your name,